Thank you, and good afternoon. Can everyone hear me? Okay, so Amy apologizes that she can't be here, but she and I are both part of this project, so hopefully I can fill in. I did just find out 2 days ago that I was doing this, so there will be a little bit of reading, and I apologize. Since 2014, the Museum of Northern Arizona has partnered with the National Park Service to assess condition of previously recorded archaeological sites within Glen Canyon National Recreation Area. And to start out, I'm going to point out a few locations that we're going to be talking about. Most people in this audience are already familiar. We have Page, Glen Canyon Dam down here, Height up here, joined by the Colorado River, Mexican Hat over here, and the San Juan River running between. This area, Cedar Mesa, at the north end of which is Natural Bridges National Monument, and White Canyon that extends from here down to south of Height. The Lake Canyon and Slick Rock Canyon that we're really going to focus on is right down here south of Hall's Crossing area. So M&A is focused on understanding the impact of boating visitors on the lake, along the lake shores of Lake Powell, and livestock impacts away from Lake Powell. These are impacts to archaeological sites. To date, we've visited about 500 sites, which is nearly 25% of the documented sites within Glen Canyon National Recreation Area. As we're working, we find ourselves walking in the footsteps of former archaeologists, which leads to a great deal of head scratching as we attempt to correlate our site data with records from those expeditions and projects. This paper is going to focus on our efforts to reconcile information from sites that M&A visited in Slick Rock Canyon with records from the 7th Bernheimer Expedition of 1929. Charles Bernheimer was a wealthy New Yorker who immigrated from Germany and made his fortune in the textile industry. He lived in a mansion not far from Central Park in New York City. But Bernheimer was fascinated by the canyon country of southern Utah and northern Arizona. He financed and participated in 10 expeditions to this region between 1919 and 1930 under the auspices of the American Museum of Natural History. In spite of being a self-described tenderfoot and cliff dweller from Manhattan, Bernheimer was a capable outdoorsman. His early expeditions focused on the area around Navajo Mountain, including establishing a trail to Rainbow Bridge. A lot of you are probably familiar with the book about that. In 1929, his attention shifted to the little-known area north of the San Juan River. One of the main goals of the 7th expedition was to determine the extent of basket maker culture north of the San Juan River, east of the Colorado River, and south of White Canyon. Basket maker people were the earliest prehistoric agriculturalists in the northern Southwest. They lived in this region between about 500 BC and AD 700, and there was an extensive basket maker occupation on Cedar Mesa in southeastern Utah. Early archaeological expeditions were drawn to basket maker sites because of the beautiful textiles preserved in dry alcoves. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, many of basket maker sites in southeastern Utah were excavated with little, if any, documentation. Collections were separated and sold or loaned to numerous museums across the country. To accomplish the archaeological goals, the Bernheimer Expedition included Earl Morris, the prominent archaeologist from the Carnegie Institute who accompanied Bernheimer on 2 previous expeditions and had also excavated at Aztec ruins in New Mexico. Like all of his earlier expeditions, Bernheimer was guided by John Wetherill and Ezekiel Johnson. The 7th expedition also included a Navajo guide named Tahahe, who was also known as Bill Holliday, 3 additional wranglers, Ralph Fowler, Kenneth Helquist, and Kent Nielsen, a cook, 46 horses, and 1 dog rounded out the outfit. The expedition left Bluff City on May 25th and arrived in Natural Bridges National Monument on June 16th, traveling through, quote, the extensive, difficult, and uninhabited region where for 3 weeks we met no other living human beings, end quote. A lot of the quotes in here, actually most of the quotes come from the Bernheimer diary, and we'll get to research on that shortly. This map shows the route of the expedition between May 28th and June 17th. The explorers spent the first 6 days in Comb Wash and Cedar Mesa areas excavating at numerous basket maker sites, and that's this area right over here. From there, they traveled through the Clay Hills Divide towards what is now Hall's Crossing. They worked their way down Castle Creek and eventually west to Lake Canyon, arriving on June 4th. Lake Canyon had been the site of Lake Pigaret, a natural lake formed by a large amount of alluvium deposited at a side stream confluence. It had served as a welcome oasis to early travelers and cowboys in the areas, including the Hole in the Rock expedition. Lake Pigaret was the final of a series of paleo lakes formed in Lake Canyon between about 3000 BC and AD 1915, when headward erosion from an advancing arroyo drained the lake. Lake Canyon, however, remained a source of permanent water and provided access to the Colorado River. From Lake Canyon, the expedition headed southwest, eventually making their way down steep sandstone slopes to the Colorado River and into Slick Rock Canyon. In Slick Rock, the group had a fine camp near a wonderful spring coming out of the Navajo sandstone, as Bernheimer described it. After spending the nights of June 5th and 6th in Slick Rock Canyon exploring and excavating alcove sites, Bernheimer, Morris, Johnson, and Wetherill set off for the confluence of the San Juan and Colorado rivers. The confluence overlook at that time was called North Junction Point and was the only geographical objective for this trip. It lay 2 days away, following an arduous route across side canyons and over Slick Rock. As Bernheimer recalls, quote, "A more barren, more desolate country could barely be described than the land we traversed just east of the Rincon." He also noted that the cowboys who bring the cattle in here are, besides Wetherill and Johnson, the only white men who were ever to see North Junction Point, and they were brought in or led by some Paiutes. The expedition reunited for a night at Lake Canyon and then made their way north. They spent 3 nights, June 10th through 12th, investigating sites in Moki Canyon, including Bernheimer Alcove, where they finally found the basket maker artifacts they were looking for. They excavated multiple burials and documented distinctive basket maker period rock art at the site. As an aside, Museum of Northern Arizona also did quite a bit of work in Moki and Lake Canyon, but that was before we really started investigating the Bernheimer Expedition, so we didn't have time. At that point, we weren't trying to correlate sites. Now we're focused on Slick Rock Canyon. From Moki Canyon, the group headed north to rendezvous with their automobile pickup in Natural Bridges National Monument. They spent a waterless day on June 13th, traveling from Moki to Cedar Canyon. The expedition continued north toward Red Canyon. Their plan had been to cut across country and eventually follow the Colorado River. Ezekiel Johnson promised Bernheimer all a comfortable ride, a promenade, but this would not be the case. It had been many years since any of the guides had been down to that area, and no trail could be found. Bernheimer describes the experience. "Everything was parched. No one wanted to talk because we did not know which side of the compass should be turned to. We were steering for the Colorado, and that river has a way of traveling a few miles south, then east, then west, then north, and as we all know, it is lined with 600 to 800 foot high cliffs. Eventually, after following, quote, a slick rock descent, steeper and more tortuous and longer than any we had met with before, the expedition made it to the river. There they found that the river was running high with spring snowmelt and had washed away the trail situated on the erodible Chinle Formation terrace. A struggle through willows, quicksand, and across unstable talus slopes followed. Finally, the tired and muddy expedition reached Glen, Red Canyon Ranch, the home of a hermit miner. Another long day followed on June 15th. Due to lack of water, the expedition covered 35 miles in 10.5 hours to reach Fry's cabin in White Canyon. By midday on June 16th, the next day, they reached Natural Bridges National Monument, where Ezekiel Johnson was the caretaker. They spent time exploring the monument before rendezvousing with their pickup on June 17th. And I don't know about you guys, but I never want to ride a horse across a natural bridge. So the focus of this paper is on the time that the Bernheimer Expedition spent in Slick Rock Canyon. Reverse archaeology is the process of linking items in museum collections with their original site location. This was pioneered at basket maker sites on Cedar Mesa by the Wetherell Grand Gulch Project in the 1980s, where researchers documented historic inscriptions at archaeological sites and then compared them with records in journals, letters, and other sources. Their goal was to identify the provenience of archived artifacts and human remains at museums throughout the country. In our case, we were unable to find any historic inscriptions in spite of Bernheimer's report that expeditions were made in 2 alcoves in Slick Rock Canyon, albeit in blue pencil, which, as you might imagine, does not last very well. Instead, we relied on Bernheimer's journal, Morris's report, and the photos that document the trip. The photograph album from the 7th Bernheimer Expedition is curated at the J. Willard Marriott Library at the University of Utah, contains 264 photos. Most are of the expedition as it explored the landscape, and as might be expected, a lot of them are not in great shape. 39 photographs were from the Slick Rock Canyon where we worked. Based on Bernheimer's diary and Morris's report of the expedition, the group excavated at least 4 alcoves. First of all, the photo in the upper left was taken by the Bernheimer Expedition, not University of Utah. It just got mislabeled in this slide. It's likely that the expedition camped below a site called Widow's Ledge. Bernheimer describes their camp as 50 feet above the creek on a sand deposit, and right above our camp is a cave with houses. Widow's Ledge, one of the largest Puebloan sites in this stretch of Glen Canyon, is a Pueblo II, Pueblo III period site consisting of 20 structures in 2 alcoves high above the canyon bottom. It's the only site in Slick Rock Canyon that matches Bernheimer's description of having the Pueblo structures above a large sandy flat. University of Utah excavated the site in 1962, and it was stabilized in the 1970s and 80s. The excavations were part of the Glen Canyon Project, which most of you are familiar with, large-scale salvage project to document natural and cultural history before the area was flooded by Lake Powell. The Glen Canyon Project remains one of the largest scale salvage archaeology projects done in the Southwest. It resulted in documentation of over 2,000 new sites and excavations at 104 sites. And the professional publications that came out of that number almost 200. Based on the descriptions of its intact roof and photographs in the album, we know the expedition visited Mistake Alcove. This is another Pueblo II-III period site with the remains of 11 structures. Most are habitation rooms, but the site also includes a square kiva with a roof that's still intact. And on that very first slide of the M&A cruise, there was a structure with the intact pole roof that's at Mistake Alcove. Mistake Alcove was also excavated by the University of Utah in 1962 and stabilized in the 1970s and 80s. The Bernheimer photographs focused on structure 3, a single-story habitation room, and in 1929 the structure looked nearly intact. By 1959, the roof had either collapsed or been pushed down by visitors. By that time, there were quite a few river runners who were hiking up to the site. In 2019, when we were there, there's no evidence of the room. Currently, both Widow's Ledge and Mistake Alcove are fenced due to pretty extensive visitor impacts, and the Park Service is talking about implementing guided tours because they're both pretty fragile sites. Because the Bernheimer expedition was focused on basket maker period site, it doesn't appear that they excavated at either Widow's Ledge or Mistake Alcove. But based on the photographs and in the diary, and Morris's reports, we were able to identify 3 sites where they did excavate, all of which we visited and redocumented. One of those is an alcove where Morris excavated the burials of 3 children. Unfortunately, all the photos from that site show human remains, so they are not fit for sharing. The additional excavated alcoves were not photographed, but we could identify them based on the descriptions of their location and features. In spite of nearly 2 days of excavating at least 4 alcoves in Slick Rock Canyon, Morris's catalog of collected items only includes 5 things from Slick Rock, perhaps because they weren't finding the basket maker materials they were looking for. The cataloged items are a cook pot, a piece of tanned hide, an ear of corn, and a fire drill. Morris also cataloged the mummy of a boy about age 10 that was wrapped in an intact feather cloth. Our efforts at reverse archaeology also provided insight about the evolution of archaeology through time. First, we'll note that some things remain the same. Transportation is always a challenge in the canyons of southeastern Utah. Good news, Susie the mule was rescued and went on to live a normal life. Also, but though in that left-hand photo, note all the vegetation buried by the water. This was a really high spring up that far on the Colorado. Second, logistics of traveling in the canyon country of southeast Utah are always complicated. Boats and mules are crucial. We had no mules, but we did have one crew member who served the purpose admirably. We also did some swimming, which was pretty common during the University of Utah project, and we replicated that one too. When it comes to fieldwork fashion, what comes around goes around. After a period when most of the University of Utah archaeologists, all men you will note, were going without shirts, now long sleeves and big hats are back in style. When it comes to who's doing the work, things have changed for the better. Women are not just in the labs these days, but are also conducting and leading fieldwork. Native people are more than a footnote assigned an anglicized name. Indigenous and other minority archaeologists, in fact, are becoming an important presence in the field of archaeology, combining traditional knowledge and values with scientific practice. While not yet universal, archaeologists regularly work with the tribes to identify appropriate and pertinent research questions and field methods, and to incorporate traditional knowledge into interpretation of the results. Our next steps will be to apply what we've learned. We'll share our information with NPS managers to help them understand which sites were excavated by Bernheimer versus which were looted in the more recent past. For example, the site where the 3 children were excavated by Earl Morris has depressions that were thought to be recent pot hunting. When the University of Utah recorded them, they said it had been looted. These are the depressions right here, and right here. You can see here, this is this large slab here. For example, the site we now know that these depressions date to 1929, to the Bernheimer Expedition. This site was an attraction for visitors in the past when the level of Lake Powell was higher. Now the lake is far enough down, it doesn't get much visitation. But the abundant graffiti carved into the alcove is obvious. It's obvious that people do go there. Knowing that human remains were found in the site in the past will affect how the NPS manages the site. For example, they'll do more regular monitoring to make sure that additional individuals who might be buried there won't be exposed, or if they are, they can be relocated very quickly. Our information will also aid in the understanding of the prehistory of Glen Canyon by precisely identifying where artifacts that are now in museums were obtained. The NPS will know where the artifacts from Glen Canyon are housed, and at the same time, the museums will know where their collections were acquired. We're currently working with other scholars to update records at the University of Utah Archives and at the American Museum of Natural History in the Anthropology Archives. Finally, and arguably most important, this information will help tribes better understand where their ancestors were originally moved and where they're currently housed. With hope, the small boy excavated by Morris and Bernheimer nearly 100 years ago will eventually make his way home. Thank you.